If someone inherits 1,002 acres of land, how do you think they would feel? Of course, they would be happy. It would feel like a blessing, just like it did to me. But the real shock came when I discovered that an HOA had been occupying my land for years. They believed they were the owners, charging people fees, giving permission to build homes, and enforcing rules as if it were their personal property, when the truth was that no one had ever even looked at the real documents. Before I tell you the full story, I want to know from which part of the world you're watching this video. Make sure to tell me in the comments below. And if you enjoy real HOA stories, subscribe to the HOA Story YT channel and turn on notifications because the real game is just about to begin. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm not an ordinary man, and this land did not come into my possession by coincidence or luck. It was never a sudden miracle. It was a legacy. This land originally belonged to my grandfather, Robert Carter, a quiet but remarkably far-sighted man who purchased it back in 1985, long before the surrounding area even began to develop. At the time, people thought he was wasting his money on empty land that led nowhere. There were no gated communities, no paved roads, and certainly no HOA signs back then, just open land, trees, and silence. My grandfather believed in thinking long-term. He used to say that land doesn't need noise to grow in value, it needs patience. Over the years, life moved on. He passed away, paperwork was buried under old files, and the land slowly slipped out of sight and out of mind. For decades, no one talked about it. It sat quietly in government records, untouched, unnoticed, and unclaimed by anyone who truly understood its worth. Then, one day, everything changed. While sorting through old family documents in storage boxes, I came across a worn folder filled with legal papers, property deeds, surveys, tax records, and signatures dating back decades. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I read deeper, my hands started to shake. The land described in those documents wasn't small. It wasn't insignificant. It was massive. And according to every legal record I could find, it belonged to me. That was when I learned the truth. The land where an HOA was operating freely, building homes, charging residents fees, enforcing rules, and acting like an untouchable authority, was legally mine. I didn't confront anyone right away. I didn't show up angry. I didn't send emails or demand answers. I stayed silent. I listened. I watched. I observed everything from a distance. Because silence, when used correctly, is far more powerful than noise. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, didn't see me as a threat. To her, I was just another outsider, someone she could ignore, dismiss, or push around if necessary. She spoke confidently, issued warnings, and behaved as if the land was unquestionably under her control. In meetings, she acted untouchable. In emails, she sounded authoritative. In her mind, I was weak, inexperienced, and uninformed. What she didn't know was that while she was underestimating me, I was working quietly behind the scenes. I requested certified copies of every legal document. I hired professionals to verify boundaries. I ordered updated land surveys. I cross-checked county records, historical ownership data, and zoning archives. Every step was calculated. Every move was deliberate. I didn't rush because rushing creates mistakes, and I couldn't afford any.
Piece by piece, the truth became undeniable. The HOA had no legitimate ownership. Their authority existed only because no one had ever challenged it before. People paid fees because they assumed the HOA was legitimate. Rules were followed because no one questioned their origin. The entire system survived on assumption, not law. And I had the law on my side. The survey was completed. The boundaries were confirmed. The paper trail was airtight. By the time everything was finalized, the truth was no longer just a suspicion. It was a legal fact. The land was mine, every acre of it. Still, I remained calm. I didn't celebrate. I didn't reveal what I knew, because the most dangerous moment for those who abuse power is when they believe they are still in control, when in reality, they are not. Karen Whitmore and the HOA had no idea what was coming. They didn't know who I was. They didn't know what I had uncovered, and they certainly didn't understand what a true landowner with patience, evidence, and resolve is capable of doing. They thought I was powerless. They were wrong. Once everything was in place, the surveys complete, the legal documents verified, and ownership officially confirmed, I knew it was time to act. I didn't rush in recklessly. This wasn't about revenge. It was about asserting my rights and making sure that no one could ever challenge the truth again. Karen Whitmore and the HOA had been living in a false sense of power for years, and now the balance of authority was about to shift completely. The first step was legal notices. Certified letters were sent to the HOA board, carefully detailing the legal ownership, the boundaries of my land, and the obligations of any occupants on my property. The tone was formal but firm. There was no room for misunderstanding. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a statement of fact, backed by irrefutable evidence. Within days, the letters were received, and the quiet began to crack. I could already sense the panic on their end. Karen Whitmore called emergency meetings, frantically trying to figure out how to respond. Emails flew back and forth among the board members, each more anxious than the last. It was almost comical to watch them scramble. For years, they had assumed control over a property that wasn't theirs, acting as if every decision, fee, and regulation was perfectly legitimate. And now, every false assumption was unraveling before their eyes. While they panicked, I remained methodical. I consulted my lawyer to ensure every action I took was legally airtight. I scheduled on-site inspections, marking the property boundaries clearly and officially, leaving no room for dispute. Every survey marker, every corner post, every document was evidence of my legal claim. The HOA could no longer claim ignorance. They now were fully aware of the real ownership and had no defenses left. But I didn't stop there. I understood human nature, and I knew that authority without control can be desperate. I documented every interaction, every reaction, and every statement from the HOA board. I wanted to make sure that if this situation escalated, I had a complete record. This was not just about reclaiming land. It was about showing that truth, patience, and preparation always prevail over arrogance and assumption. Soon, residents who had been unknowingly paying fees to the HOA began asking questions. They wanted to understand what was happening, why the notices had arrived, and whether their contributions had been legitimate. Karen tried to placate them, but it was too late. The credibility of the HOA was crumbling. People began siding with the legal owner rather than the board they had once trusted blindly.
One of the most satisfying moments came when I finally met Karen in person. She had expected a weak, intimidated man, someone who would back down under her authority. Instead, I was calm, composed, and fully in control. I explained the boundaries, showed the legal documents, and made it clear what the law allowed and what it prohibited. Her confidence wavered immediately. She had underestimated me at every step, and now she had no choice but to acknowledge the reality she had ignored for so long. From that day on, the dynamic changed completely. The HOA could no longer issue arbitrary rules or charge fees unlawfully. Their meetings, once full of authority and bravado, became quiet and cautious. Every action they considered had to be measured against the undeniable fact that the land belonged to me. And yet, I never acted with cruelty. My goal was never to humiliate, but to assert rightful ownership while letting the law speak louder than any personal confrontation. The residents gradually adapted, respecting the proper procedures and the legitimate authority of the landowner. Karen and her board members, once confident and brazen, were now cautious, subdued, and aware that true ownership comes with responsibility and consequences if ignored. By the end of this season, the lesson was clear. Power based on assumption and fear is fragile, while patience, preparation, and knowledge create unshakable authority. The HOA that once thought they could dominate 1,000 acres was now a silent witness to the strength of rightful ownership. And I, Daniel Carter, had not only reclaimed my land, but had also restored balance, order, and respect where it was long overdue. The story doesn't end here. Every step, every decision, and every challenge has been a lesson in strategy, resilience, and patience. The game has shifted, and the players now understand who truly holds the power and who does not. If this story gave you any knowledge, brought you any joy, eased a bit of your pain, or provided any useful information, I kindly ask you to leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Please subscribe to my channel and share it as much as possible so that we can stay connected and continue sharing these stories together. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps me bring more stories like this to you.